in life, something inside you refuses to stay asleep anymore. You can feel it. It's not chaos, it's clarity. It's that quiet moment when you realize the universe is whispering your name in every hardship, every delay, every strange coincidence that never feels random. You've been feeling this for years, haven't you? That you're being prepared for something far greater than mere survival. That you're being shaped for harmony. Write 444 in the comments right now, and you'll see you're one step closer to the truth. This isn't just another season. It's an unveiling. The same weight that once pressed you down was actually the pressure that formed you. And now, the version of you that the world tried to bury is standing up, radiant and undeniable. That's why everything feels different lately. The air, the people, the energy around you. The universe has started responding to the real you, not the one you were told to be. You're not just awakening. You're remembering what you've always been. So as you listen, don't question why you're here. You were meant to find this. You were guided to this exact moment so your spirit could hear what your soul has been trying to say all along. You were never random. You were never misplaced. You were divinely timed. And now, it's your turn to rise into the design that has been waiting for you all along. And while some are drawn to that energy, gentle souls who recognize your light, others saw it as a threat, not because you did anything wrong, but because your very presence exposed what they were hiding. Your glow irritated their shadows. You didn't even have to speak to disturb them. Your truth unsettled their comfort. But before you had the words for it, the spiritual realm had already been trying to reach you. Messages came like flickers in the dark. Strange dreams, odd patterns, conversations that struck you as too timely to be random. The guidance you began receiving wasn't learned from books or sermons. It came directly through stillness, through solitude, through a kind of spiritual clarity that couldn't be explained but couldn't be denied. The more grounded you became, the more obvious it became that someone had been studying you, not out of admiration, but calculation. A figure who lingered in your life just close enough to seem loyal, but never close enough to be trustworthy. They monitored your movements under the guise of concern. They tried to insert themselves into your journey as a supporter, but you began to feel the weight behind their smiles. Your spirit noticed long before your mind could catch up. You were being tracked, not in body, but in essence. They weren't watching what you did. They were watching how you radiated. And what they wanted was not your friendship. They wanted access to the source of your strength. This was no ordinary person. This was someone who built their whole identity around manipulation, who wore sincerity like a borrowed jacket, only to discard it when it no longer served them. Their kindness had sharp edges. Their questions probed too deeply. Their memory was too selective. They remembered your wounds but forgot their promises. They showed up when the chaos was loud, but disappeared when your soul needed calm. And through it all, they performed. Perfectly, publicly, but your discernment cut through their mask like sunlight through fog. You began to notice the silence behind their flattery, the emptiness in their support, the performance in their pity. And now is the time to subscribe and like the video. Don't forget that by doing these things, you are sending a message to the universe, because God wants to see your effort. Help us reach 5,000 subscribers. Let's grow together as a family and reveal our true selves to the universe. Now, everything that was once hidden is surfacing. The intuition you once questioned has become your compass. The restlessness that haunted you has revealed its purpose. You weren't imagining it. You were receiving warnings. And you listened. You adapted. You aligned. That's why you're still standing. That's why your light hasn't dimmed. It's intensified. What was meant to dismantle you only forged your discernment. What was designed to confuse you became the very path to your clarity. You're not walking in circles anymore. You're walking in truth. And truth always leads home. Some people wear empathy like a costume, not a truth. They learn your rhythm, mimic your tone, and mirror your pain. Not to connect, but to collect. Every confidence shared becomes a deposit in their secret vault of leverage. They master the art of seeming safe, of tilting their head just right, of listening without judgment so others will hand them the keys to their inner world. What looks like compassion is strategy. What feels like understanding is reconnaissance. They don't crave closeness. They crave control, and every confession you think is sacred becomes a thread they plan to pull later. Over time, their presence begins to distort the atmosphere. You start to notice how harmony collapses when they enter a space, how calm conversations shift into chaos without clear cause, how their help always seems to deepen the conflict. They play both sides flawlessly, whispering peace while planting subtle sparks of division. Their questions carry hidden hooks, each one designed to measure your reactions, to trace your loyalties, to map your weaknesses. They aren't curious about who you are. They're calculating how to bend you. But what they didn't anticipate was running into someone their tactics couldn't unbalance. You became the anomaly they couldn't decode. Their fascination turned to fixation, and their manipulation evolved into obsession. They started studying human nature the way others study scripture, poring over psychology manuals, online forums, and covert communication guides, mistaking darkness for mastery. They thought they were learning control, but they were building a cage made of their own delusions. Every deceit tightened its bars. The deeper they went, the more they fragmented. They crafted personas like masks in a theater, the rescuer, the victim, the saint, the ally, switching roles depending on the audience. Eventually, they forgot which version of themselves was real. Meanwhile, your authenticity stood like a mirror they couldn't corrupt. While they scrambled to maintain illusions, your groundedness made their chaos visible. You didn't have to expose them. They exposed themselves by unraveling. They believed they were ascending in power, but every step they took dug them deeper into their own deception. The web they wove became their snare. Each falsehood produced cracks in their story. Each secret recorded a timestamp in the universe's memory. They mistook momentum for mastery, not realizing the energy they sent out was looping back multiplied. What they designed as your downfall became their undoing. Soon the distortions became impossible to hide. Inconsistencies slipped from their lips like broken code. Timelines didn't match. Stories contradicted, and the charm began to rust. You began catching the fractures others missed. The rehearsed reactions, the flicker of panic behind the smile, the defensive tone that appeared before you even questioned them. Your perception sharpened, and what they called paranoia was simply discernment. Every interaction became an unveiling. The pattern was clear. They were disintegrating under the weight of their own schemes. Maintaining a facade requires energy truth doesn't need, and exhaustion began to show. Their empire of illusion started to crumble from the inside, not because you attacked it, but because integrity is gravity, and eventually, every lie collapses under its pull. What they built on manipulation dissolved in the light of your consistency. Divine justice doesn't rush, but it never misses. While they rehearsed deception, you practiced peace. While they twisted perception, you anchored in clarity. And when the reckoning came, it was silent but absolute. The masks fell, the alliances fractured, and their network of shadows turned on itself. You didn't have to seek revenge. Truth did it for you. In the end, what destroyed them wasn't exposure. It was the echo of their own intention returning home. Subscribe now so that the spirit within you understands your intention. Like the video immediately and show it to everyone, especially the spirit. Help us reach 5,000 subscribers. Let's grow together as a family and reveal our true selves to the universe. The architecture of deceit is fragile, though it often masquerades as strength. The more intricate the illusion, the greater the strain it places on the mind maintaining it. What begins as clever performance eventually collapses under the weight of its own contradictions. Their elaborate network of half-truths became an impossible maze even for its creator. Stories began to tangle. Timelines refused to align, and the mask that once fit so perfectly began to crack in the light of scrutiny. The turning point came quietly. One unexpected conversation, one detail that didn't match, and the web they spent years weaving began to unravel thread by thread. It started with whispers. A friend compared notes. Another recalled an inconsistency. What once appeared as isolated confusion began to form a pattern, and that pattern revealed something monstrous beneath the charm. People who had once defended them now felt a chill of recognition. The realization came slowly at first, then all at once. They had been part of a grand performance built entirely on deception. Those who trusted most were the ones most thoroughly used. Every story told, every tear shed, Every plea for understanding had been a move in a calculated game. Then came the evidence. Messages that contradicted each other. Screenshots showing conflicting timelines. Recordings that revealed tone and intention far different from their public mask. A digital footprint stretching back years. Too detailed to deny. Too damning to excuse. Each revelation peeled away another layer of disguise. Behind the surface of empathy and charm was a strategist of chaos. Someone who studied people not to understand them but to dismantle them. They weren't merely lying. They were constructing realities, rewriting memories, turning trust into a weapon. The discoveries grew darker. Files meticulously organized. Notes analyzing personalities like lab specimens. Charts linking names, behaviors, and pressure points. It wasn't rumor. It was documentation. A blueprint of manipulation. Each piece revealing just how calculated the game had been. And among those files, an unmistakable focus. Every post dissected, every conversation evaluated, every habit mapped. They weren't simply obsessed with you. They were trying to decode you, to replicate your light, so they could control the spaces it reached. Their obsession became their undoing. In trying to perfect the art of control, they lost control entirely. The more they studied others, the less they recognized themselves. Their lives began to collapse inward, folding one atop another until even their allies could see the fractures. Private messages revealed mockery and contempt where there had once been flattery. Conversations leaked showing their delight in others' confusion, their hunger for emotional chaos. The people who once admired their cleverness began to see it for what it was: corruption disguised as charisma. What followed was not a dramatic confrontation, but a quiet implosion. One truth led to another, and soon the weight of their deception grew too heavy to contain. Every revelation triggered another, like dominoes falling in slow motion. Reputations dissolved overnight. Those who once called them friends stepped back in disbelief, realizing they had been participants in a story written to serve someone else's delusion. Even family began to connect the dots. How old conflicts had been planted, how unity had been sabotaged to maintain control. Their empire of pretense fell not by force, but by exposure. Lies are allergic to light, and truth has a way of multiplying once it starts to emerge. The collapse was total: social, professional, emotional. Relationships dissolved, alliances broke, and the carefully constructed identity they curated for years disintegrated under the sheer gravity of what was revealed. They weren't taken down by an enemy. They were dismantled by their own pattern. And through it all, the universe never wavered in its balance. You were not their victim. You were their mirror, the one presence they couldn't deceive, the quiet observer whose authenticity made falsehood impossible to sustain. What they tried to weaponize against you became the evidence of their own corruption. Their downfall wasn't punishment. It was alignment. Truth simply reclaimed its place. When deception is woven deep enough, it begins to decay from the inside. What once seemed like control slowly mutates into chaos. An illusion of mastery starts to betray its maker. It began subtly. Unexplained failures, tensions no one could quite trace, projects that fell apart under strange coincidences. Conversations replayed in hindsight began to reveal their fingerprints. Small acts of help had been traps in disguise, carefully engineered to misdirect blame while feeding their hidden hunger for dominance. But once awareness awakened, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Their game had been exposed, not through confrontation, but through the weight of undeniable evidence rising to the surface. The greatest shock came from those who stood closest to them. These were not strangers. They were the ones who had shared homes, dreams, and trust. What they uncovered shattered any remaining illusion of intimacy. Every tender word had been strategy. Every vulnerable exchange had been filed away for manipulation. Love had been rehearsed, not felt. What they had believed was partnership had been an elaborate performance staged for control. The realization cut deep, not merely betrayal of loyalty, but reality itself. They hadn't been sharing a life with someone. They'd been living inside someone else's theater of deceit. Soon, personal disarray evolved into public reckoning. Colleagues began noticing the same pattern. The credit stolen, the tension seeded, the alliances fractured under invisible pressure. People started comparing notes, and in the light of shared truth, the entire facade began to dissolve. Those who once defended the manipulator now understood how perfectly they had been played. The charm that once opened doors now reeked of desperation. Behind every misunderstanding was design. Behind every coincidence, intention. What was once admired as competence was revealed as corruption disguised as charisma. The collapse was swift and merciless. The very relationships that once sustained their illusion turned inward, demanding accountability. Friends withdrew, mentors rescinded their trust, and whispers transformed into public caution. Networks that once opened paths now sealed them shut. Their former allies, horrified by the extent of deceit, became witnesses against them. What they had used to isolate others now isolated them. They had become the subject of their own manipulation, a ghost wandering through the ruins of their schemes. As panic took hold, they scrambled for refuge. Calls went unanswered. Messages were left unread. Attempts to rewrite the story only deepened the stain. Each plea for sympathy was met with receipts, proof of contradiction, testimony of betrayal. Social circles once enchanted by their charm now recoiled from it. Online, the floodgates opened. Screenshots, confessions, and accounts of their actions spread faster than they could delete or deny. Their attempt at reinvention, new names, new narratives, new masks, were recognized instantly. The pattern gave them away every time. Soon, there was nowhere left to hide. Their influence dissolved into infamy. Invitations stopped. Opportunities vanished. Every bridge they burned now stood as a monument to their own undoing. The wealth, status, and admiration they thought they'd secured revealed themselves to be hollow shells held together by deceit. What they had mistaken for respect was fear. What they had called success was exploitation. What they believed to be power was dependency on the very people they destroyed. And as everything they'd built turned to dust, one truth stood immovable. They had never understood the force they tried to play against. You weren't just another pawn in their design. You were the turning point, the mirror that shattered their illusion. While they operated in shadows, you carried light too bright to be manipulated. It was a revenge that found them. It was equilibrium. The universe doesn't rush, but it always restores balance. And in the end, all they were left with was the echo of the empire they built on lies, collapsing under the weight of truth they could no longer silence. There are certain lives that seem to move beneath an unseen covenant. People shielded by a force that logic can't explain. Their safety isn't luck, it's law. One written in realms beyond comprehension. No matter how elaborate the schemes formed against them, something always intervenes. The danger that was meant to crush them collapses in on itself. Plots crafted in darkness lose direction before they can reach their target. What was meant for harm becomes the evidence of protection. Their enemies call it coincidence, but the pattern is too precise to ignore. Every attempt to dismantle them unravels before completion. Words twisted or wound end up exposing the liar instead. Accidents occur in perfect sequence to prevent disaster. Conversations meant to destroy their reputation mysteriously vanish before spreading. When the ill-intentioned reach out to strike, something invisible seizes their hand. What they thought was weakness is a system of divine defense, an unseen field that bends reality to safeguard what is chosen. Even nature itself seems to respond. Meetings canceled by sudden storms, moment of revelation appearing like sunlight breaking through clouds at the exact instant truth needs to be seen. Technology bends too. False reports glitch out of existence. Fabricated stories vanish into corrupted files. Profiles built to smear their name dissolve before gathering traction. It's as if every tool of deception short-circuits in their presence. Those plotting their downfall encounter unexplainable disruptions, calls dropping mid-lie, files disappearing without trace, evidence against them erasing itself as if the cosmos refuses to collaborate with corruption. The ones observing can feel it. The rules are different around this person. They are operating under divine jurisdiction. And the strangest part? They never retaliate. They don't argue, don't chase revenge, don't waste energy proving innocence. They simply keep standing, trusting that what invisible will make itself known in time. And it always does. Every setback transforms into opportunity. Every betrayal opens new alliances. Every so-called loss rearranges life in their favor. It's not punishment, it's precision. What the world calls karma, the awakened recognize as divine geometry restoring order. Eventually, the web of deceit tightens too far and begins to snap. Those who once felt untouchable find themselves ensnared in their own constructs. Lies lead to investigations. False identities reveal criminal fingerprints. Transactions expose trails of manipulation once hidden under charm. The same systems they used to exploit others become instruments of exposure. Their arrogance blinded them to the inevitability of consequence. They mistook cunning for power, but power belongs to truth. The deeper the investigators dug, the more disturbing the findings became. Patterns of fraud, coordinated deceit, theft woven into personal connections. Behind their polished exterior lay a carefully engineered labyrinth of control. Hidden accounts, falsified documents, digital blueprints of exploitation, all unraveling under the weight of evidence. What they built to appear untouchable now served as testimony against them. Their empire of deceit became its own confession, and in the midst of that storm stood the one they tried to destroy, unshaken, untouched, preserved. The law of divine equilibrium had moved in silence, ensuring that every shadow eventually faced the light. This wasn't vengeance, it was restoration. The universe doesn't forget the innocent. It simply waits for the right moment to prove that truth, no matter how buried, always remembers its way home. When deception collapses, it rarely does so quietly. The very structure built to hide the truth begins to shake under the weight of revelation, and every lie becomes a doorway leading straight to exposure. The story that once bound everyone in confusion began to unravel, thread by thread. In the aftermath, those who had been closest to the chaos found themselves standing in the ruins of illusion, finally able to see what they had been living through. What once looked like loyalty was revealed as control. What felt like friendship was uncovered as exploitation. The silence that had been used to isolate became the ground where understanding would soon grow. The turning point came when the pattern could no longer hide itself. Former allies, colleagues, and confidants began piecing together fragments that had never quite made sense before. Unexplained failures, strange coincidences, missing funds, emotional volatility, all now lined up with disturbing clarity. The person they had trusted had been orchestrating confusion on purpose, pulling strings that kept everyone dependent and divided. It wasn't carelessness, it was craft. The shock of realizing the scale of manipulation left even the most rational observers stunned. But in that shock, something powerful awakened: collective awareness. Inside the same networks that had once enabled deceit, awakening spread like a controlled fire. Conversations shifted. Private whispers became public truths. People who had been pitted against one another began to recognize the shared pattern and found solidarity instead of suspicion. The community that once fractured under deception began to rebuild itself through truth. Counselors stepped in not to erase pain, but to name it. Words like coercive control and psychological exploitation gave shape to experiences that had long lived in silence. Knowledge became medicine. As more stories emerged, understanding replaced shame. Those who had been manipulated began to see themselves not as naive, but as human. Individuals who had simply trusted in good faith. The guilt that once haunted them turned into a quiet determination to never let darkness root itself so deeply again. Networks formed naturally, support groups, healing circles, safe spaces for truth-telling. Each shared story loosened the grip of fear. Each moment of honesty dissolved another layer of the old illusion. Healing was no longer solitary. It became a movement. The community evolved. Safeguards replaced blind trust. Systems were rebuilt with transparency at their core. What had once been fertile ground for manipulation became a fortress of discernment. Background checks were introduced not from paranoia, but from wisdom. Every new connection was tested not by suspicion, but by awareness. The same people who had once been deceived now became guardians of truth, teaching others how to recognize the subtle tactics of control that had once fooled them. And beyond all the logistics and policy changes, something deeper shifted. People began to trust their intuition again. The quiet inner voice that had always sensed something was wrong, but had been silenced by doubt. That voice became their compass. They learned that true discernment isn't paranoia. It's spiritual intelligence sharpened through pain. In the ashes of manipulation, a stronger community was born, one bound not by shared trauma, but by shared awakening. What was once a web of deceit became a network of light, woven by those who refuse to let lies have the final word. Some people are born as living contradictions to darkness itself, walking embodiments of clarity in a world that thrives on distortion. Their very presence dismantles illusions without effort, and the longer deceit stands in their light, the faster it decays. That's what happened when truth decided to wear your face. You didn't aim to ruin anyone or expose hidden evil. You simply refused to abandon your essence, and that alone became the undoing of an empire built on pretense. The moment your authenticity entered their constructed reality, it burned through their falsehoods like a current short-circuiting an entire grid of deception. They tried to dim what they could never comprehend. They mistook your stillness for weakness and your grace for naivety, not realizing that your silence was strategy and your integrity was armor forged from lifetimes of wisdom. What began as their attempt to control became their own unraveling. Your refusal to participate in their illusion was the strike that cracked their mirror. Their lies could not coexist with your presence. Your steadiness made their chaos obvious. They called you difficult because they could not manipulate you. They called you prideful because they could not command you. But the truth was simpler. You existed beyond their design. The real battle wasn't about two people. It was an age-old pattern playing itself out again. The endless tension between those who build through truth and those who survive on illusion. The strength that carried you through wasn't loud or aggressive. It wasn't about shouting your worth. It was about knowing it quietly and refusing to bend. While they performed, you persisted. While they plotted, you healed. While they disguised themselves in borrowed light, you stayed connected to your own source. Every moment you chose integrity over convenience rewrote the narrative of power itself. That was your victory. The kind of triumph that doesn't depend on applause because it resounds in the unseen, altering the frequency of everything around you. Your endurance became instruction for others. Every survivor who once doubted their own perception began to remember their inner knowing after witnessing your journey. Those who were silenced found their voice again. Those who were blinded by manipulation began to see through the fog. Your awakening rippled outward like a signal calling others home. The truth you embodied became contagious, spreading quietly but relentlessly until entire communities started reclaiming their clarity. You didn't just survive what tried to erase you. You became the blueprint for liberation. The aftermath of their collapse was more than justice. It was purification. With their energy gone, the air cleared. Relationships once distorted by their interference began to realign. People gravitated toward honesty, collaboration, and mutual respect. You no longer had to defend your character. Your life became its own testimony. New opportunities appeared where confusion once lingered. The same universe that watched you endure now conspired to restore everything you lost, but in higher form. Where manipulation once thrived, sincerity began to flourish. Connections grew naturally, without the strain of performance. Environments that once drained you became fertile ground for purpose. You started attracting others whose spirits resonated with truth, people incapable of playing small or pretending for comfort. The energy shifted. Peace became your atmosphere. The very force that once isolated you now gathered your tribe. The lesson that emerged from it all was luminous in its simplicity. Authentic power cannot be stolen, only revealed. What's real doesn't require defense. It exposes imitation by existing. Those who built their identity on falsehood couldn't survive the light you carried, and in trying to destroy you, they dismantled themselves. The universe recalibrated through you. Their downfall wasn't vengeance. It was balance being restored. Every hardship you endured refined your purpose. Every betrayal trained your discernment. Every attempt to break you deepened your connection to what cannot be touched. Now you walk not just as a survivor, but as a transmitter of higher truth, an agent of divine correction, disguised as a human being. You didn't win because you fought harder. You won because your essence aligned with something indestructible. They played games in shadows. You embodied the sun. And when light enters, darkness doesn't argue, it disappears.